Trump of the state of Florida has received 312 votes. Kamala D. Harris.
Well, this happened today. Vice President Kamala Harris on this January the 6th announcing the results of the November election, certifying Donald J. Trump as the 47th president of the United States. The transfer of power today notable when compared to what happened 4 years ago. To talk about it, Loyola Law School professor Jessica Levinson. She joins me now. Happy New Year. Thanks for being with me tonight.
Happy New Year.
All right, so this was relatively quick, less than 30 minutes, 100% drama-free. Compared to what we saw 4 years ago, what was the lesson from today?
I don't know if there's a lesson other than that what we saw 4 years ago really was an aberration in our nation's history. January 6th is not a day that I was ever asked to speak on TV, and I'm a constitutional and election law professor, because it's really just supposed to be nothing but, frankly, a rubber stamp. And we can look there at Vice President Harris, obviously, who lost the election, looking back a quarter century to Vice President Al Gore, who lost a very heated election against President George W. Bush. He was the one to certify the election results. If there's a big takeaway, it's that anything but a peaceful transfer of power like we saw today really is an aberration for us.
Well, moving forward, we know that Trump plans to pardon those involved in the January 6th attacks literally as soon as he is inaugurated on day one. He says he wants to do this within minutes. To what extent, that has yet to be seen. There's more than 1,000 people who were convicted for that. Constitutionally, this is your wheelhouse. He is able to do this.
That's right. In the Constitution, there are specific places where you give a president exclusive authority, which is exactly what it sounds like. It means you don't share that authority with anyone else, and the president can decide to pardon people for federal offenses when he sees fit. There may be some constitutional question about whether or not he could self-pardon, but not with respect to those involved in January 6th. I think it's clear that he has the power. There's some question, Marla, as to whether or not accepting a pardon is an admission of guilt. But as you point out, many people who were either convicted or pled guilty, and they could receive pardons from the president, and that is absolutely constitutional.
Well, you just brought up the issue of self-pardon, where there could be some questions around that. Trump is to be sentenced this Friday, January 10th, 10 days before he will be inaugurated. In that hush money case, his lawyers have appealed this or trying to push this back. Where does the law side in this? What do you expect to happen?
And you're right to point out that this is a state case. Obviously, he would not have the pardon to pardon himself when it comes to this New York State hush money case. Where does this stand? At this point, the New York State judge overseeing the case, Judge Juan Merchan, has said the sentencing will continue on January 10th. President Trump is the one who asked to push back the sentencing, but there really will be no sentence other than you were convicted of 34 felonies. There will be no jail time. There will be nothing like an ankle bracelet or probation time. So I think what we're looking at here is a symbolic sentence, but in terms of practical, real consequences, the president can still serve in the Oval Office. Nothing in the Constitution prevents him from being convicted of these felonies and once again serving as president.
And I'm sorry, I think you may have said it, but does he have the power to self-pardon?
No, because we're talking about a state case here. So the only person who has the power to grant some sort of clemency or a pardon would be a governor. When it comes to state crimes, we have a governor who has the power to pardon. When it comes to federal offenses, we have the president. And you're right to emphasize that point, Marla.
Yeah. What about, we know that he is expected to appeal, but the fact remains, although this is the unconditional discharge, that's correct, right? That's what he will be sentenced to, which is essentially no punishment. Nonetheless, Professor, he's still a convicted felon.
Well, that's right. And in terms of the appeals, and you asked me about this before as well, in terms of appealing the conviction, the clock starts for that when he is sentenced. So he can't actually appeal the conviction until he is sentenced. But there's lots of other things that he can and has appealed. For instance, how this case was brought. This was a case based on the falsification of business records, and it was brought as a felony, which is somewhat unusual. It was charged as a felony because the prosecution said, well, the falsification occurred because there was the intent to commit or conceal another crime, but the jury didn't have to agree on what that other crime was. That's an issue that may be live for appeal in the New York State Court of Appeals. So I don't think even when there is a sentence, this is the end of the case. And yes, to emphasize again, he could be sentenced. The conviction could be upheld. He can still serve in the Oval Office.
Okay, and then lastly, the presidential immunity, which the Supreme Court decided on. This, as far as his other legal dramas are concerned, the presidential immunity safeguards him.
When it comes to potential crimes that are committed, so there's 3 different buckets of that particular immunity decision. There are things that only the president can do. We talked about the pardon power, for instance. And what the court said is for those exclusive presidential powers, there's absolute immunity. If the president engages in official acts, and Marla, for the hush money case, the judge concluded that we were not talking about official acts, and that's why there was not immunity. That when there's official acts, there's a presumption of immunity. And when there's unofficial acts, meaning private acts, maybe you're talking to your painter or something, the person who's painting your private home, let's say, and there's some altercation or a battery, there is no immunity from criminal prosecution.
Got it. Okay. Well, we always appreciate you. You always like taking a class from you. You're a wonderful professor. Jessica Levinson, Loyola Law School professor. Thanks again.